Hello, one and all. Welcome to the Professor Hamamoto Show. It is February 4th, 2021, on this fine day, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time from Northern California. And I mention that because this geographic region within the United States of America is going to be the focal point of today's Professor Hamamoto talk. And in case you're wondering, here's the magic candle. I usually have it in the background, but I don't want to distract from today's important analysis. So let us begin, because there's a lot of material to go in 2021, and that is the importance of history. That is the central importance of historical knowledge and information. And this also reinforces the necessity of cultural social analysis. And where we come in is that all of these endeavors are too important to leave to the experts. All these endeavors are much too important to allow the authorities, so-called, and I use that in a sort of a jaundiced, cynical sense, like the Supreme Court or all these people that were going to rescue us and save us and render judgment that was going to save the American Republic. No, we're going to do that. And we do that by analyzing, understanding, studying the world around us, and extrapolating from that and extending our analysis, such as in the case of true crime, extending that to an understanding of the larger society, because we see certain patterns. What we're looking here at a micro level is a reflection of what's going on at the macro level, the macro political level. And that idea is common in all realms of inquiry. The Gnostic tradition, for example, talks about the micro, the macro, the mini, and the maxi. As above, so below. It's nothing new here. It's a dialectic. So with that, with the philosophical prelude out of the way, let me begin by stating that the type of crime, the specifics of the crime, the nature of the crime is very much tied to the society, the milieu, as I will be calling it, the political system out of which these crimes, or in which these crimes are committed. For example, there was no serial killing back before the war, World War II, I'm speaking of. We've had many wars since then, called small wars by some people with a strange sense of humor. But I'm talking about World War II. Because there was no interstate highway system, and serial killers are by nature tied into mobility, as we'll see in the case of Phillip Garrido and his wife Nancy Bocanegra, which in English means black head, right? There's some sort of some dark occult symbolism there. That was her maiden name. I think she took her husband's name, Garrido, as her married name. They're both Latino, by the way. Not that has any special bearing here, except for the fact that you notice that there's certain ethnic groups, and you'll see this on the Super Bowl this coming Sunday. There are two specific ethnic groups in particular that are being groomed, just like abductees are groomed, or people who are being molested are groomed, that are being groomed for being penned up and enslaved, first psychologically, behaviorally, and then politically and economically. And that ritual is going to be enacted this Sunday at the Super Bowl. I don't know what number. Are we on, 89 or something? I stopped counting. But you're going to be seeing that, just as like last year we saw, who was it? Shakira. And was it Jennifer Lopez, J-Lo from the Hood, right? The two, one Latina from Mexico and one from the U.S., Puerto Rican. And by the way, it's no longer called Latino or Latina. I have to hip you to the latest academic lingo, and it's now Latinx, because some Latinx feminists, academic feminists, said we're going to do away with sexist language and gendered language. So Latino means a male, Latina means female. So we are going to abolish the two and we're going to call it Latinx. So you're going to see some Latinx vibes going on at the Super Bowl. And you're also going to see some African-American vibes. In fact, Jay-Z is going to be producing the Super Bowl for the second time in a row. These are the two groups that are being groomed and cultivated and elevated so they can be cut down and brought low. So check it out on Sunday. I'll have some more Super Bowl predictions when I join the Thursday Trio group in an hour, a couple hours at 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. You want to see that because you'll want to know where to put your money for the action there in Las Vegas. Not really. I'm not a betting person. I don't even watch the Super Bowl. I might catch the halftime show later on as it's put out there and kind of take a look at it. I'm sure all the YouTubers, the people who specialize in supposedly breaking down the occult and the mystical and the Freemasonic and the Illuminati and all the other good stuff that's not. It's degenerated into nothing but a bunch of distractions there. So again, I'm warning you, don't confuse me with those knuckleheads. I provide something that is far more intense and incisive than what these people do who have flooded YouTube. YouTube does not deserve me. It doesn't deserve my level of talent. And I'm going to deplatform YouTube as soon as I can. And I'm taking all you with me. We're going to go into the web. And we're going to have our collaborative efforts come to full fruition in that medium, and we're going to abandon all social media. We're going to walk away from it, and that's not a threat; that's a promise. All right, and because these knuckleheads in social media, so-called big tech, are part of this larger problem that we're going to be talking about today, and it's no coincidence that they are also mostly based in Northern California. The hallucinati are based right over here, a couple miles, maybe 2.5 hours from me, in the so-called Silicon Valley. I prefer to call it DARPA Valley or Pentagon Valley or Mossad Valley. It's all or NATO Valley because it's part of the military penal complex out of which monsters like Phillip Garrido have been, and Nancy Bocanegra have been. I'm going to start trilling my R's. Okay, I'm just practicing my Espanol, which I like, by the way, and enjoy Mexico and Latinos and Latinxes and everything that goes with it. All right, so just having some fun with the language, which is beautiful. The complex, the big tech, big media, the penal, the academic, especially in the psychiatric, so-called the mental health industry, all come together in the case of Phillip Garrido and his wife Nancy, as I hope to demonstrate to you today. First of all, I gave you a brief prelude last time, but for those of you who weren't there, last Tuesday, go watch that episode. It's great. Tell all your friends. I want to have tons of views because this is important information for your survival, for my survival, for our common survival. But I give you a little preview. Let me just briefly talk about the best book I found. There's about 3 or 4 books on it. On this case so far, it's the abduction of Casey Lee Dugard in 1991 from she was at the bus stop on the way to school. This is around the South Lake Tahoe area, which is in California, right up the I-50. Remember, there have been no serial killers or spree killers up until the engineering of the interstate highway system, right? I-5 goes through here and I-80. Northern California, well, the whole country is ringed in interstate highways. And as I alluded to before, and let me just digress for a moment before we talk about the case in more general contours, but the interstate highway itself is a product of the military industrial system. The massive funding that went into putting in the interstate system, which in turn enabled serial killers to make quick getaways and to appear 1 hour over here in Lake Tahoe and then an hour later they're in Sacramento, maybe at Tower Records reading periodicals with Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, right? Oh, I'm sorry. I promised myself and you that I would not refer to him as a Unabomber, but this is for the people who didn't see the episode on Theodore John Kaczynski, who I prefer to look at as an important social thinker and critic of the technological slavery, which is the title of one of his books. So with the interstate system, you can be in South Lake Tahoe. An hour later, you can be in Sacramento. An hour later, you can be back in Oakland, or the East Bay, the other side of the San Francisco Bay, where the Garrido couple had settled down and maintained their compound, their sex slavery compound that had J.C. Lee Dugard as the centerpiece of this family, this strange extended family that Phil Garrido had assembled. So yeah, and the person who signed in the Interstate Highway Act, the initial person, from what I understand, I'll have to go and check the records, or you can do this after it and share the information with your colleagues here in the live chat. But I believe it was President Dwight D. Eisenhower, General Eisenhower. And of course, it was sold to us very similar to the internet. Oh, it's going to create communities and bring us people close together and bridge all these distances, blah, blah, blah. But as you know, from the very beginning, the generals who conceived it and sold it to the public, the mind control, the perception engineers, they knew what it was going to be for. It was going to be to further consolidate and centralize military control from the top down. That is our interstate highway system, and it's inextricably connected to the rash of spree killers and serial killers that we've seen beginning in the 1960s in particular. And there's some other influences that come in, which I'll talk about, including pharmaceuticals, right? This is where the psychiatric establishment comes in, those creeps who dare to diagnose President Trump from afar and hold conferences at Yale University. Dr. Bandy, what's her name? Bandy Lee or something? Yeah, Bandy X Lee. She's a medical doctor. She's a psychiatrist, and said, yes, President Trump is crazy. He needs to be taken out of office and blah, blah, blah. And she's not the only one. There are all these people that people look up to as being experts, including, I think, Robert J. Lifton was in this anthology. I don't know if he was consulted, whether he was brought into the program to stigmatize the president. But anyway, that's the psychiatric establishment, and they will return to their baleful influence on crime and criminality, and really even the creation of crimes. I think we have to look at the psychiatric establishment as not the saviors, as not the doctors of the soul, as it's sometimes been expressed, that's going to save us from our own neuroses, our own phobias, our own hang-ups, right? They promised all of this stuff, just like we were promised a free ride on the interstate highway. And we were promised community and wealth and economic growth through the internet, right? All these lies and all these promises, false promises. We're getting wise to it, though, don't you think? Let's not get overconfident, though. All right, the abduction of J.C. Lee Dugard, South Lake Tahoe, 1991. I believe she was 10 years old at the time. Now, for those of you who don't know, Reno, Nevada, South Lake Tahoe, Reno is further away, but that whole area is a recreation spot. Beautiful lake Tahoe, natural lake. It's not dammed at all, or it might be, but I think it goes back to the Ice Age. But it's a beautiful site, woods, trees, it's in the mountains, skiing in the winter. I'm sure there's snow there right now. I haven't been up there in a long while. And it's also a magnet for a lot of transient populations and people who work in the hospitality and the casino industry. Because on the other side of the state line, here's California, here's Nevada. On the other side of the state line, it's legal. Gambling is legal in Nevada. And you just have to walk from one block to another, and all of a sudden you can gamble your heart away and your savings. And in fact, J.C. Lee Dugard's mother was a dealer in the casino. And a lot of the employment is created by this particular industry. Some of you may remember Reno as being the home to the Cal Neva Lodge. Remember I said California and Nevada? It's called Cal Neva Lodge. And by the way, I have an ashtray from the Cal Neva. I should have brought it up here. I collect old hotel ashtrays because they don't have them anymore. You notice that? Because smoking has been declared a health hazard and it's been forbidden. And pretty soon, bread and butter will also be outlawed. In my case, rice, and will be forbidden from having it on the premises. Right? That's how they do it. Right? They want to save us and spare our health. But anyway, the Cal Neva lodges there, and Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack and his associates, who, as you know, are connected to the deep history, the deep, dark history of American intelligence and criminality, had a place up there. And I've had conversations with people in that whole area, Lake Tahoe, Reno in particular, has all kinds of stories, of which this is one spectacular episode within that. So I'm just giving you the overview. It has a reputation for being a place of strange goings on, disappearances as well, people who disappear and are never heard from again, which makes the abduction of J.C. Lee Dugard by the Garrido couple even more spectacular, because 18 years after she was abducted, she was already an adult. She was found, she was discovered, she was rescued. And I say rescued in quotation marks. I don't know if there was if it was really a benevolent act or a selfless act of discovery that returned her to the civilian world. I'll explain what I mean. I'm being kind of cryptic right here. It's kind of suspicious how she all of a sudden was reintroduced to the larger world after being held in captivity in the backyard of the Garrido couple for 18 years. Where was she held? She was transported from South Lake Tahoe, and they might have stopped in intermediate places. They might have had a pit stop here in Sacramento en route to the East Bay. And I'll talk about the East Bay because I introduced this segment, this particular monologue, by invoking this premise that we're talking about the military-industrial complex here, right? Interstate highways, the pharmaceutical industry, DARPA Valley, right? Silicon Valley, otherwise known. Well, Pittsburgh as a community itself, Antioch, these are all towns in that area. All those towns in the East Bay. When I say East Bay, I'm talking about south of Oakland, across the San Francisco, for those of you not familiar with the area, across the bay from San Francisco, which many of you do know about. Few of you will venture across the Bay Bridge over to Oakland, which has always been a joke until recently, until some tech heads start moving in there. And there's a whole gourmet scene there now. And Berkeley, by the way, is also on the other side of the San Francisco Bay. They're north of Antioch and they're north of Pittsburgh area, but within driving distance, I think within an hour, maybe by today's traffic, maybe 90 minutes, depending on what the freeways are like. But there's also the BART system, the Bay Area Transit System, a pretty nice one. But Berkeley also, UC Berkeley also figures into the story because it was Garrido's taking his two daughters by J.C. Lee Dugard to UC Berkeley that he was profiled, and they did a run on the Berkeley Police Department, UC Berkeley Police Department, University of California, Berkeley Police Department, did a run on him, and they saw this huge rap sheet. And it was because of a female police officer. There's something's kind of strange about this. The two little children, I think one was around 12 or 13, the other was 9 or 10, were kind of robotic and kind of blank looking, and their clothes were anachronistic. And this guy was kind of hyper and he was spouting all kinds of schizoid type of ramblings, right? And that's supposedly how they were caught, UC Berkeley. And by the way, I'm doing a book on crimes committed on university campuses. And I just realized I have to include the case of Phil Garrido and Nancy Garrido Bocanegra, and the case of J.C. Lee Dugard as part of this anthology. Because I like true crime and I want to contribute to the literature. And I think I have a very interesting perspective on the centrality of the university and as part of this this terror complex, this captivity complex, right? What do you think all this these maneuvers, not just the biologicals and the pharmaceuticals, but the behavioral science and the anthropology of terror? What do you think that's coming from? It's coming out of the university, right? So that's my premise, and maybe I'll start debuting some of the case studies as we move into this series here. Before I platform YouTube and just devote myself to full-time writing, right? So anyway, she was transported to Pittsburgh, California. Her parents, she had a younger sister, and her mother worked at the casino. She had remarried this one individual. And I mentioned that the stepfather because he was held under suspicion for all 18 years of the abduction, right? The FBI or police agencies would every once in a while show up and check into him, and there were rumors being said about him, and he seems to have been a victim of this process. Well, I mention that because oftentimes, as most of you know, missing persons cases, so the first person they look at, the suspects, the chief suspects are family members, right? But he appears to have been, in fact, was when I first started reading the book, I said, well, where does he figure into this, right? Suspicious sort that I am. I'm not suspicious. I'm just following patterns as any good investigator would. So anyway, the point is that it destroyed the family. They divorced and they went to separate directions, and they wanted to hang on to each other so they can get through this tragedy of unimaginable importance. But it was just too much for them to bear. And so they had to deal with their sadness. And the mother slipped into alcoholism and all kinds of problems. Yes, there are real problems out there, ladies and gentlemen, and they're not all manufactured, except for the fact that this particular social science experiment, the abduction of J.C. Lee, yes, I said it. It was a social science experiment. I'm kind of skipping ahead here. That was engineered. So all this pain and suffering that was created by not just J.C. Lee Dugard and her two children that were fathered by Phillip Garrido, and the family and the relatives and all that, it's a product of a horrific mindset, which I'll get into here. It's people who are watching this, about Dr. Ewan Cameron, about Humphrey Osmond, about the whole LSD craze, and about the medical establishment, their complicity, and the university complex, and their complicity in creating all these crazy pharmaceuticals and hallucinogens to enslave the population. And there's some civilian versions of it too. Maybe some of you are on them. They go by brand names like Prozac, Xanax, right? They're called in the literature selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and I'm very well acquainted with them because as I got in the terminal stage of my teaching career, I just saw mostly women being subjected to this form of pharmacological slavery. So that's another important dimension here, which I'll get into this book and this situation. And I'm not putting you down if you're on it or have been on it and wish to leave it. If you do consult the proper medical protocol to release yourself from psychopharmaceutical bondage, right? It's dangerous, if not lethal, if you just all of a sudden go off of these pharmaceuticals. Maybe that was the intention. Anyway, let me go to Phillip Garrido. Who is he? Glant talks about him as a mama's boy. His mother pampered him, his father was disciplinarian, and I don't know if that's important. I don't think it's really a determinant factor. I think it's more important that and this is where Glant does not go right? This is my contribution. This is why criticism is important, indispensable to the reading and assimilation process, because we're adding to it. Just like you're listening to this talk and you have your own stories, you have your own experiences and your own database, let's say, of wealth of knowledge that you're going to bring to this talk here and add to it. It's accretive. It adds to it. It's additive. And we'll come up with a better understanding of this complex through this process. So, but that's kind of Freudian. So you kind of have to throw it in there. Blame the parents. So I didn't take it too seriously, and he did. Thankfully, he didn't stay on it too long. He had a good editor, and John Galat is a really good writer, I believe, in general, not just because he's a true crime guy, but I think his style, his the economy of it. He has a good editor. Let's say that. So Phillip Garrido, yeah, he was mediocre in school, but in high school, he finally found his passion, which was music. And we're talking about, mid 70s up to the, later part of the 70s, maybe early 70s. The hippie era had ended. And we were in the 70s, I think in the midst, if I can remember correctly, in the midst of soft rock. I don't mean to sound disparaging about it, but the corporations had gone in there and started taking over, just like everything else, good and organic and solid and natural. The corporations go in there and pervert it so they can sell it back to us in denatured form. Well, that happened to the music. But strangely enough, Garrido had pretty refined tastes in music. He was into progressive rock, or what now called progressive rock. And I was into it as well. He was into Yes, YES, the British group. And he even bought he's a good musician, but I've seen him on YouTube. He has a really good voice. He's a really good singer, which really got me saying, I gotta check this guy. I heard about the case, but now I have to read the book on it. And here we are now, right? We're talking about it and moving the framework ahead. We're building it out to understand the pharmaceutical behavioral science control that the American and world public are now enslaved to. And we saw, of course, a manifestation of that on Capitol Hill on January 6, 2021. I'm sure most of the people out there were whacked out on some sort of SSRIs. That's something for us to check out, to investigate now, because it's crucial. We have to take control over the account that the mainstream media are trying to push in a certain direction. But let me get back to finish up with Phillip Garrido here. Predictably, he got into marijuana. Let's suspend whatever you feel or believe about marijuana, whether you're for. I personally don't think it needs to be criminalized, but I'm against the indiscriminate use of it, and also the use of it for children and even teenagers, where their brains, their prefrontal cortex, are not really fully developed yet. And I know the story, it's been around since ages. It's Mother Nature and all that stuff. But there's all kinds of stuff found in nature that are not good for you, right? Like, castor beans. Are you going to eat those too? Or peyote buttons? No, I don't think so. I think you're better under the guidance of someone who knows what they're doing. But anyway, the reason I mention this is because, like everybody else in that time, Garrido wasn't getting this LSD from a tree. He wasn't growing it in his backyard. Where was he getting it then? Well, John Galat doesn't really get into it. But those of you who are watching this know that there are these military intelligence infrastructure there that puts drugs into the society, right? You know that. You've been listening to John O'Loughlin reading. You've been hearing his conversations, dialogue with Harley Schlanger, and you know about the British role, and Canadian as well, which I'll talk about, role in enslaving entire societies and populations. China, man, it's like, 1 out of 5 adult men were opium smokers, and it ruined the country, and it allowed Britain to go in there and take over. And China is only now beginning to emerge out of it, and it's just the ultimate ironies when you have these supposed independent media people who should know better. They do know better, but they're given talking points, right, by British intelligence, talking about the Chinacoms all the time, or how China's going to take over the world, And again, I'm not a friend of them, but I agree with the LaRouche people, John O'Loughlin and Harley Schlanger, that you're looking at the wrong society, you're looking at the wrong country. You got to look at Britain. And all of the fingers point in there, and that's why they have all these people saying, yeah, China, we got to go to war with them people. Yeah, bomb them back to the Stone Age. We don't like them because, we saw all those movies in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, and all them Chinamen are going to come at us in human waves, and they don't have any reverence for life, and man, they're fanatical. See, we've been inundated with sort of Dr. Seuss type level propaganda from a very young age. So don't fall for the hype. Most of these people can't find their own butts with their own hands in the dark. They don't know what they're talking about. They're given talking points, or they're going off to some movie that they saw on Netflix, right? And they're probably high, they're probably on SSRIs themselves, or pot smokers, or sleep 17 hours a day, and are barely coherent, right? So he was like that, Phillip Garrido. He was dosing on LSD, which this is in the book, he always had access, free and easy access to quality drugs and quantities of drugs, which he sold to his classmates. Right, so we'd have a whole generation of drug-addled, decapitated, so to speak, boys and girls moving into adulthood, and that's part of the plan, because they're also screwing with the curriculum. Right, this is like the beginnings of the post-gender world in the 1970s. This has been workshopped back down to Brave New World, and the British intelligence establishment realized they have to get rid of testosterone-driven male alpha people. And you have to destroy machismo, or any semblance of male domination. Why? Because it's inherently bad? No, so that we can take over, meaning the city of London and the Wall Streeters and whoever else is benefiting from the enslavement of the human population. So he was feeding this to his classmates, which is part of the plan. And in addition to this, Garrido suffered a motorcycle accident. I don't think there were laws mandating helmet wear back in California those days. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it's fairly recent. It's only in the last 30, 40 years, which is, for me, recent. Anyway, he suffered head trauma, and according to I guess he was a psychiatrist or a physician, I'm not really sure, who testified in a sentencing hearing for Garrido, that he claims that he didn't suffer any brain damage. I don't see how you fall off a motorcycle and hit the pavement and not suffer some kind of damage. And as a result, they took away, that eliminated any sort of diminished capacity defense or consideration where it came to the sentencing of Phillip Garrido. Then this came out in 1977, that he had this accident when he was a teenager. Why 77? Because in 1976, Richard Garrido kidnapped a woman by the name of Katie Calloway. She was 26 years old at the time. She was also from the South Lake Tahoe area. She had stopped at a convenience store, and there was this attractive, tall, like 6'4", long-haired guy, and he looked like a rock star, because he was a rock star in the casinos out there. He became a professional musician, so he was a skilled musician, and probably had some presence. He's a performer. And she made the blunder of taking him he claimed his car was disabled, and she made the mistake of driving him to some location. And you know what happened next, right? I don't need to go into details. You can read the Glock book, which I recommend. So he was tried in 76, 77, and he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. First federal prison, then state prison. And I mentioned the two is because Garrido managed to manipulate the conflicting or overlapping jurisdictions. And when I say Garrido, I mean that in quotation marks, because I think the crimes were committed in this particular area with kind of nebulous areas of jurisdiction or unclear areas of jurisdiction, so that he can be allowed to continue his reign of horror, his terror targeting against women, because he abducted. And some of these cases are unsolved, and it's suspected that Garrido was responsible for them. But he was allowed to go free. In fact, you know where this is going. Although he was sentenced to 50 years in prison, first state and then federal in prison or state. Plus, he was also going between two states, right? Nevada and Reno. That's why I mentioned the Cal-Neva connection, in addition to federal and local jurisdictions. So you guessed it, right? He was let out of prison way before it was going to be a mandatory sentence, but the judge, the attorneys, the prosecutors, it fell through the cracks. Accidentally? I don't know. There are very few accidents in history. They might have been in on it, right? Because as I mentioned before at the outset, we have an interlocking system of corruption that includes law enforcement, the court system, academia, the parole system. All these people that we are trained to look up to and depend on, please rescue us. Well, let's trust in you. We'll trust your plan. And you will bring us justice and freedom and return democracy to America, right? You can tell I'm being sarcastic, I hope, because that's not going to happen. It's going to happen when we get involved at a very basic level. And we will do that by going through cases like this and picking through them. So sentenced to 50 years. Ha, what a joke. So let me contextualize this for you. Gary Webb, in his book published in 1997, Dark Alliance, he came a little bit after, but he was talking about a larger local, which means Los Angeles, he was in San Jose at the time. He was writing for the San Jose Mercury, which used to be a good paper. And he found in Los Angeles, the whole crack epidemic that was hitting LA, all the major cities, Los Angeles, Chicago, you name it. And he realized that it was part of this larger international network. And those of you who've been listening to John O'Loughlin's show, which is now called McDuff_Live, watch it today and watch it every day. He's done readings about the whole drug complex that goes back to the Opium Wars and then through, in the case of his father's professional career, through the Vietnam War. And a lot of these systems. No, by the way, speaking of the Vietnam War, I sent John O'Loughlin and George Webb a chapter from a book I found out about the history of Army psychological operations. It's the final chapter in this book. And I think I'm going to post that for my Patreon people so you can read it yourself. And the reason I mention this is because the 4th Army Psychological that George Webb was an eyewitness to and reported this on Capitol Hill, January 6, 2021. That same group, 4th Army Psychological, guess where it has its origins? The Vietnam War. Yes. That's where it came from. So there's a direct connection between the McDuff story and what happened in January. See how history works? See how this type of reportage and investigation functions? We can see the historical continuity, and if we can see the connections, we'll be more likely to be able to break those bonds of slavery, because they're depending upon historical ignorance to maintain their power. Many of them don't even know the history, which is, by the way, our advantage, because our side, that's all we do. We're looking at them. These people are just going from caper to caper to caper, and from mark to mark to mark to victim to victim to victim. They operate like rats, right? They just go from one grain of rice to another. But we're big picture people. We're breaking it down, putting it together. So that's where we have decided to do strategic advantage. These people they might be very skilled in hardware, and they might boast about their hand-to-hand combat skills right in the field, even though the Vietnamese peasants defeated them in modern warfare, right? Again, they were going off of old World War II movies with crazy gooks who, life is cheap, according to General Westmoreland, and they can't take down the great American empire, right? And by the way, it's the same arrogance that the people who are in charge now have about us, we Americans. We are the new gooks that the generals and the NATO people think they're going to get over on us. But they should know from the lessons of history that the peasants will always defeat you, because this is our land, this is our country, this is our heritage, this is our legacy. These are our families, and our willingness to die is greater than your ability to kill. You got that? That's what that came right out of the Vietnam War. This is General Giap, Vietnam. He was a history teacher, by the way, before he became a general of the entire North Vietnamese forces, Giap. And when I was in Da Nang, Vietnam, a couple of years ago, there was a whole boulevard right outside my hotel. Beautiful beach, by the way. China Beach is right on the strip there, within walking distance, and it's named after General Giap. He understood that it's not about hand-to-hand combat. It's not about hardware. I call it mind-to-mind combat. And that's you and me, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. Keep that phrase in foremost in your awareness. Mind-to-mind combat. All right. Nancy Bocanegra, they got married back in 1981 very quickly. She was visiting the prison. It was, I think, Leavenworth, where her uncle was being held, and the uncle, quote unquote, introduced her to Phillip Garrido, and it became one of those prison marriages. And then when he was let out on parole, as I mentioned before, they married back in 1981. When I say uncle, what I mean is, now thinking about it, I think it was a setup. I think there was no uncle, or maybe if there was, she came on there under guise of being a Jehovah's Witness, and this is no knock on Jehovah's Witness. I have respect for them because they stood up to the Third Reich religious authorities, as I spoke about in a previous talk about the Mormons and their complicity with the Third Reich. It was the Jehovah's Witness that said, this is not our world. This is not our government. We're not going to follow any of your orders. Anyway, she was a Jehovah's Witness herself, and they married. Then he was moved around the system. He wound up in Lompa, California, which is in sort of central North California, and it's heavy militarized as well. I think there's Air Force Base, and that's important because I think a lot of the handling and a lot of the drugs and maybe even a lot of the abductions were related to military transport corridors and nodes that are all over the state of California. California is a heavily militarized state. They all are, or most of them all are. That's one of the ways that the pork barrel funding and all that to get everybody to buy into this larger behemoth, which now is owned by NATO and Klaus Schwab and the Davos group. It doesn't belong to, it's not defending America anymore. It's defending the House of Rothschild and the Queen of England, and these hereditary Venetian families that have been running the world for centuries now. So yeah. By the way, these transports, right? These military where they can move abducted girls and children and drugs, hither and yon. They're all connected by, guess what? Yes, interstate highways. That was the agenda there. The interstate highway was put in there really not to facilitate the sales of Ford automobiles or Chevrolets, or have mom and dad take the kids on a yearly summer vacation, which was part of the culture, by the way, in the 50s and 60s. It was not a lockdown culture. That wasn't the purpose. The purpose was to, again, consolidate military control through this network of interstate highways. It's just a sidebar, an important one, though. So let me briefly talk about the historical milieu, right? Milieu is what it's all about. And this is really the heart of the story here. And we have to read between the lines. We also have to draw from other books that we have read and our own experience. And there's a lot of intuition here. And it's kind of, it's no coincidence that the better intuition you have is also a reflection of your the hard work you put into assimilating this literature. Just like in basketball, lucky shot. No, you tend to be a lot more lucky when you shoot a lot of baskets and practice a lot and dedicate yourself to your craft, your discipline, whatever it may be. So historical milieu, we know that the Bay Area has a huge vice industry. It goes back to the gold rush days. There were very few women there. At the time, these are all ambitious, hungry guys coming from all over the world, even from Asia, China, you name it, Japan later, Norway, Germany. There's tons of immigrants from all over the world. This is the gold rush days, roughly 1850s, and we're in gold rush area, South Lake Tahoe. That's all gold rush area, and where you have that much wealth, that much money going on, you have super growth and vice, right? And huge transfers of wealth and hustlers and all kinds of criminal behavior. And eventually it settles down. The bankers just wind up owning everything. And then, they can create their own resorts, Bohemian Grove, and they can run their own little private armies, and they can run the government from their own little corporations. They can run the entire Air Force. They can run entire countries from Geneva or wherever it may be. That's where we're at today in 2021. So San Francisco, it saw the disembarkation, the movement of American troops who thought they were fighting wars to protect American democracy, right? Spanish-American War, where the U.S. was sent over there. They left from the Presidio, from San Francisco, right? It's a militarized city, just in a militarized state of California, in a militarized country. Militarized for the sake of these central bankers that I talked about, that to protect their wealth and to extend their wealth under the pretext of self-defense or national defense. So Spanish-American War, I'll go quickly through this: World War I, World War II, Korean War. By the way, the United Nations was founded in San Francisco too. There's the United Nations Plaza. Right off Market Street is one of the main thoroughfares in San Francisco. I think it's 1946, 47, something around there. So that should give you an indication of what San Francisco represents within the New World Order. And then the Vietnam War, out of which Garrido comes out of, and so do I. And this is where the drugs come in. This is where the psyops come in. This is where all the behavioral modification, experimentation comes to bear. This is where the counterculture comes into the picture, where they were hit very hard with psychedelic drugs and methamphetamine. All this is happening when Garrido was coming up, and Glatt missed that part. This is my contribution to it. That's why I'm fascinated by the story, because it's incomplete. And that's not to denigrate Glatt. He did his work and his due diligence so far as his awareness is concerned. But I'm reading this book from through the lens of what I have pioneered, which I call New World Order theory, right? This is the importance of having a sound theoretical framework from which to view the world, our culture, our society, our history. I call it New World Order theory. And that provides structure, right? And you're always correcting. You're always, hammering here and hammering there, but you're always in the process of correcting. But without a strong conceptual foundation, you're going to be all over the place. It's going to be formless and without any direction, right? You can do a more pointed focus analysis. And again, it's always subject to revision. Some of you will be revising what I'm telling you, because I read some of your comments, and they're quite intelligent, they're quite perceptive, and I'm learning stuff there, and I'm following up when I can, or if I can, some of the leads that you provide me in this ongoing discussion, this dialogue, this conversation. So anyway, you get the point. That whole Bay Area, San Francisco, across the Bay over to the East Bay, Oakland, and down to Antioch, and down to the city of Pittsburgh, which, by the way, was named after the Pennsylvania Pittsburgh, because it was a coal area. There's an inlet, there's a bay that goes in there that goes to Oakland, right? The city of Oakland, which is Alameda, and you have all the shipping. That's where the Kaiser ships were built, by the way, for World War II. And they needed coal, right? They needed fuel, they needed energy. And there's a lot of oil drilling there, not so much anymore, but you still see the remnants of all this industrial which we're moving out of intentionally, right? We're going into the Great Reset. So all these cities have been dying over the past few decades. By the time the Garridos moved there, it was already on the slide. It was going downhill. World War II was over, and now we're into World War IV, right? And not even knowing it. And it's the war against the American people. And they were putting the drugs in, doing the mind control, screwing with the music and the culture, all of it. And Garrido was in the midst of it. And by the way, when he had the motorcycle accident, I neglected to mention that I think it was that occasion which there might have been some neuro or psychosurgery that took place there, because he didn't talk about it in any of the official records. It was like it was expunged from his medical history, and that really raised a red flag for me. Glatt just kind of mentioned it and moved on, but I think that might have happened. And again, it's a hypothesis, a hunch, and I'd have to look back into it, the medical records and all. Even if they're in there, they're probably not, to confirm or disconfirm my hypothesis. Anyway, my argument does not fall apart on that basis of that lack of one detail about psychosurgery taking place. But we know that psychosurgery was, I wouldn't say routine, but it was part of the orthodox neurosurgical technique back then. Even earlier, right, including giving people prefrontal lobotomies, and then they say, "Oh, that's inhumane. Let's give them drugs instead. Let's get them on SSRIs and give them LSD." Right? That's a much more humane approach to helping the pain that humanity suffers for some unknown reason when they're living in social fear of death and crime and whatever else that is being engineered to keep us in that perpetual state of vulnerability and suggestibility. Okay, now I see now that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip a lot of this, and maybe I can go. I always say this, and I never do, but maybe I can go back over some of the really good, juicy parts that I have to skip over so I can end at the top of the hour. But let me cut to the chase here and provide you with my original thesis so far as the meaning of the Phillip Garrido case and others like it, because he's one of I won't say many, but one of more than a few, let's say, and one of more than a few that are in my region here, maybe even in your neighborhood. But California, the Pacific Northwest in particular, seem to be the region of the United States of America where a lot of these types of weird cases seem to take place. And someone needs to do a network analysis and chart out where these military, especially Air Force bases, where are these Air Force bases located? Where are these crimes being committed? And what is, do like a visual graphing out of it. And that might answer the question why it's the Pacific Northwest. I think it has a lot to do with aviation, for example, military and civilian. So let me wind up by reinforcing this point. What we're seeing in the case of Phillip Garrido and his wife, Nancy, is a huge exercise in military style, or I won't say military style, but military psyops. Let's just put it that way. It's a military psyops. I told you about the militarized Bay Area, the whole corridor, the interstate highway system, state of California, all of it. And that's why I call it Project Garrido, right? Just like Project Artichoke, Project Mockingbird, all of these projects that come out of the intelligence/military academic establishment. So that's my concoction, Project Garrido, in all caps. And it comes straight out of the Vietnam War experience, the 4th Army Battalion, and we saw it rolled out again on January 6th, and George Webb, our champion, broke it down. And you're going to have to spread the information one by one mind at a time. Share this presentation with your friends, with your family, and they're going to go, oh my God, because I'm getting messages from people who are watching my material and say, I'm going to show the Lego video to my friend, or the video one, Pokemon, my relatives, my kids are game heads. And again, not to disparage people who are doing this. in the same way, I wouldn't disparage someone who's hooked on SSRIs. I'm not going to disparage someone who's been entranced and ensorcelled by Lego or super soakers or the toys or the games that are putting out there, which are militarized. But you don't know it because you don't have New World Order theory lens through which to understand and look at our world. I'm presenting this to you. So share this information with your friends and family. Just a few, because I'll close with this. I'll share with you a couple of titles from academic journals to amplify, to reinforce the fact that I am coming to you from a sound empirical basis. This is not wild speculation on my part. What you are seeing here is not just standard YouTube fare about, oh yeah, the Illuminati or John D or, the Freeman, I read that stuff, been there, done that. Okay. So do not be too quick to put me in that pile of distraction. I'm much, much further upstream than that. And by that, I'm coming out of my world and looking at the academic journal literature that reinforces the perspectives, New World Order theory that I am presenting to you, that you have to take forward and bring in your own experience as either a victim or a witness to all kinds of unseemly cases, because this Phillip Garrido is one out of probably hundreds of thousands of millions of stories that you have in your possession within your family. And I want you to begin sharing that amongst yourselves and to the public. That's how we move forward on this. It's not going to come from the Supreme Court. It's not going to come from your legislators. It's not even going to come from the President of the United States. It's going to come from you and me, ladies and gentlemen. So let me finish with some of these academic journal articles. And by the way, if you are a Patreon of mine, I really appreciate it. And I share this literature with you so you can see, oh my God, I didn't realize they were this far along. They're studying this they are studying at the university, and they put it in textbooks, right? And all the undergraduate and the graduate students read this and they implement the plan. Trust the plan. That's the plan. The plan is enslavement. It's control, mind, behavioral, thought, you name it, dietary, control, full spectrum dominance is the phrase, right? So here's a couple of examples before I conclude here. And it's been a pleasure being with you today. It's a very exciting time in our life, and I'm glad to share it with you. Again, it's mind-to-mind combat that we're dealing with. Here's an incredible title for you. Hallucinogens is Hard Science. Subtitled, this is very topical, ladies and gentlemen. Hunter S. Thompson did not create this. And all the wankers who on YouTube talk, adrenochrome, this is not, it's beyond that, okay? Hallucinogens is hard science. Here's a subtitle. The adrenochrome hypothesis as the biogenesis of schizophrenia. And this is where Richard Garrido wound up in the schizoid world. So, and this is not in the book. Maybe he was kidnapping children in warm human bodies to harvest their blood. That's a hypothesis. That's a possibility. That's for you to try to put the new data point into this narrative, if it holds. But it's worth, it's a thought experiment. It's a hypothesis. You test it. Just like this scientist at the John A. Mills, University of Saskatchewan, in the journal History of Psychology, volume 13, number 2, year 2010. It's a new article, fairly new. The adrenochrome hypothesis for the biogenesis of schizophrenia. Yeah, you're learning that here on the Professor Hamamoto channel with a paltry 500 or 600 views by some wanker is talking about the Illuminati plagiarized from 67-year-old P. Manly Hall stuff, which he plagiarized from other people. Anyway, I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. Those of you who are watching and assimilating this information, I thank you. You thank yourself. You're in the right place. Another article before I conclude, Militarizing the Mind. Subtitle, Assessing the Weapons of the Ultimate Battlefield. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the material that's being workshopped behind our backs. This is the literature that helps explain how a January 6th, 2021 happens in that sacred ground, that occultic space called Capitol Hill. Authored by professors, I assume, Robert C. Brunner and Felipa Lentos, published in the International Journal of Humanities and Social Sciences and Education, 2016. This is fresh stuff, ladies and gentlemen. You're getting a bunch of retread, recycled, plagiarized material on YouTube. That's why I'm going to delist and deplatform YouTube, and I'm walking on. Finally, or let me quick, brainwashing, LSD, and CIA historical and ethical perspective. John Bruckman, MD, professor of psychiatry, University of Virginia, School of Medicine. Okay, academia, there you go. Mainstream as you please. And then finally, the granddaddy of it, and this is where the British Commonwealth of Britain, Canada connection, as I mentioned earlier, that's who we need to look at, the British end, right? The City of London. I agree with Harley Schlanger, the LaRouche Pact group. And, you know, we can look at China as well, but if you're always falling for the Chi-Com race baiting type of approach, you're going to fail forward. And if you keep uttering these cliches like China is going to take over the world and it's going to be the center of world government, you're missing the point here. The Belt and Road is a key to American, U.S. national political economic development. And I want all the young people here in America to start examining it and take off the little blinders that have been put out there by the fanboys who make these stupid ass movies about Kung Fu or whatever it might be, Gung Pao Chicken, and put only Black and Latinos up there for the halftime show, right? As if they're going to transform the new economy of the 21st century. No, the plans are to get rid of them after they brought them to a certain place. I don't find that very pleasant. I don't mean to mock that process. In fact, I'm standing against it. I'm saying this so that Latinx people and African American people do not fall for another trap. Because as human beings, we're all going to rise together if we understand the deeper strategy that's being deployed against us. And again, the Canadian feller, his name's Humphrey Osmond. This is an homage to him by Robert M. Well, he's a critic of him, but he's a clinical associate professor, Graduate School of Medicine, University of Wollongong in Australia. So this is amongst specialists. It's internationally known what has been done here. And with all this knowledge, how come we're still in this situation? Because we, the average Joe, everyday people, are unaware of it, and are also being distracted by our own people who keep talking about Chi-Coms and talking about the Illuminati and the Freemasons and all the woo-woo stuff and the Martians and and I like that stuff. But it becomes just sort of entertainment porn rather than a political, social, cultural critique that is necessary for us to defeat the bad guys who are and women, by the way. That's what the whole women's movement is about, is to bring in some real evildoers from the female side, because for them transgenderism doesn't exist. They're going to have the families, they're going to have male, female, but for the rest of us peasants, we're just going to be one undifferentiated, massive humanity before we're thrown on the ash heaps. So Humphrey Osmond, look him up. That's my time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with me today, and I'll see you on the Thursday trio. When I say trio, I mean 3 and 3 only. All right? Bye.